Colonel Tory repeating. First name, Hiss. The year is 1863, of course. I'm in Pennsylvania right now. I'm in someone's house, and I'm south of a town I've never heard of before called Gettysburg. I hear a great battle is going to come soon. A great battle which may decide how the Civil War will work out. But of course, before we can talk about what's going on in 1863, we have to talk about how we got to this point to begin with. So please do take out your review guide and let's get rocking and rolling. If there's ever going to be a big war, there needs to be causes of the war. And there are many causes of the Civil War. Question number one, first things first, sectional disagreements and debates over tariffs. Remember, a tariff is a tax on an import. The South hated tariffs, the North liked tariffs, so those two sides disagreed. Point two, red word, the extension of slavery into the territories. Everybody likes to say, well, what was the cause of the Civil War? Oh, it's slavery. Well, you're right, but the better answer is the extension of slavery. Will slavery spread into the territories? So they're debating over that. And lastly, the nature of union. What is this United States of America? Are we one country, or are we a group of states that all kind of loosely join together? States' rights. Now, another key were failed compromises over the expansion of slavery. Slavery was like a thing that the United States tried to sweep underneath the rug and hope Mom would never catch. And they tried this with the Missouri Compromise, with the Compromise of 1850, with the Kansas-Nebraska Act. But each one failed and failed and failed. So compromises over slavery did not work. Also, for whatever weird reason, there were just awful presidents during the 1850s. During the 1850s were a period of ineffective presidents. Taylor died quickly. Millard Fillmore, his nickname was the Do-Nothing President. That's not very good. Franklin Pierce, well, he really wasn't available all that much. And Buchanan was ranked the worst president ever. So there's a bad stretch of presidents, that leads us to Abe Lincoln and to the Civil War. Also, Northern abolitionists fought with Southern defenders of slavery. Southern defenders of slavery started arguing that, well, slavery is actually a good thing. It's a good thing for society. It's a good thing for these slaves. Well, Northern abolitionists says, my God, are you crazy? Look at how perverse and bizarre and awful slavery is. Most special book about this would be Uncle Tom's Cabin in 1852, written by Harriet Beecher Stowe. It's incorrect on this PowerPoint. It's Stowe, S-T-O-W-E. And her book increased abolitionist sentiment, feelings, because it was a book about the horrors, how brutal and awful slavery was. And when you read it, you wept, you cried, and you thought about slavery. When Abraham Lincoln met Harriet Beecher Stowe, it is said that he looked at her and said, so you are the little woman who started this great war. Northern abolitionists battling against Southern defenders of slavery. Still on question number 4. Now we're on question number 5. The Dred Scott decision was a Supreme Court decision in 1857 which denied a slave freedom. A slave, Dred Scott, had fled to free territory and sued for his freedom, saying, if I'm in a free land, I'm not a slave anymore. The Supreme Court said, no, you still are a slave, and stated that Congress could not limit the expansion of slavery. So the Dred Scott decision is a blow to the abolitionist cause, to the cause to finally put out the flame of slavery. All right, this is a key sequence. This is a key Civil War sequence that brings us to war. Check this out. We on question number 6. Abraham Lincoln wins the election of 1860, right? 1860 down 1860. That's a big one. Abe Lincoln did not say, I'm going to free all the slaves. But everybody knew that he wanted to limit the expansion of slavery. Southerners, point 2, well, they feared that he was going to try to abolish slavery altogether. So they will secede. They left the United States, one after another, after another, after another. And the South had left because they feared that Lincoln would try to abolish slavery. And then in 1861, in South Carolina, in Charleston, South Carolina, cannon shots rung out in the April sky as the South fired on Fort Sumter. And the first shots fired began the Civil War. Lincoln responds by calling for troops in 1861, and he's going to use these troops to invade the South. And the South's got to get their armies ready to fight against these troops coming into the South. And now it is on like Donkey Kong. Who are these key leaders of the Civil War? All right, let's start with Abe. Let's start with Honest Abe, shall we? Abraham Lincoln, POTUS, President of the United States. He insisted that the Union must be held together by force, if necessary. We might think today, well, the United States should always be together. But then, people had really different ideas. And Abraham Lincoln says, it is one nation, it will stay together. Other people disagreed with him. And he will use force if he has to. Now, the other president for this new country, the Confederate States of America, was Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis was actually a U.S. Senator before the Civil War began from the state of Mississippi. So you've got Abe Lincoln, President of the United States. You've got Jefferson Davis, President of the Confederate States of America. What about these generals? Well, the Northern commander, my personal commander, is General Grant. Ulysses S. Grant. He is a Union commander, and he won victories over the South after many other commanders had failed. As a matter of fact, we had some terrible generals for a good while, and we took beating after beating after beating from that guy. Robert E. Lee, Confederate General of the Army of Northern Virginia, the biggest Confederate army. Robert E. Lee from Virginia was the Confederate commander, and the greatest Northern commander is Ulysses S. Grant. Now, speaking of Lee, funny thing, he was against secession. He didn't think it was a good idea for the South to leave the Union. He wanted to stay together with the Union. But he did not like Abe Lincoln's idea of bringing troops into the South. He did not believe that the Union should be held together by force. He would not raise his sword against his home state of Virginia. So, even though he opposed secession, he didn't believe that the South should be held, or the Union should be held together by force. Hey, number 9, Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass is a former enslaved African American who will become a prominent abolitionist, or probably the most prominent abolitionist, and he will always urge his friend, President Abraham Lincoln, that former slaves should fight in the Union Army. How great would these soldiers be? Former slaves who have been shackled by the horrors of slavery, now with muskets in their hands, brass buttons, to fight for the Union. But that won't come, because it won't come right away, because it's just not allowed. But maybe in 1863, Abe Lincoln will change this. Maybe. All right, major events of the Civil War. Hey, I said maybe, let's do it. 10. Abe Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. I bet you knew the Emancipation Proclamation. I bet you knew it was Abe Lincoln. But did you know which battle was fought? And then after that battle, Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Well, that is the Battle of Antietam in September of 1862. Now, remember I said that a lot of the Union commanders lost their battles? Well, Antietam was like a tie, maybe a win for us. So with that good news, Abe Lincoln issues the Emancipation Proclamation. Now, everybody says, oh, I know that one. That's the one that frees all the slaves, right? Well, actually, it's kind of tricky. To remember Antietam and the Emancipation Proclamation, remember this. Antietam leads to freedom. Antietam, freedom. And freedom. Premium or non-premium? Hey, I was talking about it being tricky. Here's what's tricky about it. The Emancipation Proclamation freed slaves in the rebelling states. That's important. That means not everywhere. That means not in the border states of Delaware, Maryland, Kentucky, and Missouri. But all those states that rebelled, that joined the Confederacy, that left the United States, those slaves are free. So remember, it does not free all the slaves. It frees the slaves in the rebelling states. Also, it made the abolition a Northern war aim. Before, the official war aim was, well, we're holding the Union together. We're stopping secession. Now we're still doing that, but we're also fighting a war to end slavery in these rebelling states. Discouraged interference from foreign governments because, hey, Great Britain, you don't want to help out the South because we've made this thing a war about slavery, and you don't want to go and join with the pro-slave side. No way. Oh, and it also allowed for the enlistment of African Americans in the Union Army. Frederick Douglass' dream has now become a reality. Abe Lincoln makes it so that for the rest of the Civil War, there will be African American troops fighting for the Union Army. All right, we're on question number 12. How about a big battle? All right, time travel. What happened with Gettysburg? Oh, we're going to win! Yes! Northern victory at the Battle of Gettysburg in 1863 was the turning point of the Civil War because, as you can see on this map, Robert E. Lee went all the way up north to Pennsylvania and he was stopped at Gettysburg. It ended his invasion of the North and he went back down south, never to win a major battle again. Northern victory at the Battle of Gettysburg, turning point. Remember this. Gettysburg's the famous one. That is the turning point. It ended Lee's invasion of the North. All right, question number 13. After the Battle of Gettysburg, you've got to bury all the dead who died at Gettysburg. And Abraham Lincoln gives his most famous speech, the Gettysburg Address. That's the one that starts with 7 years ago. And in that speech, he says this war, this Civil War, is a war to preserve the nation, to keep the nation together. These United States of America, which, remember that first document, Thomas Jefferson, the Declaration of Independence, when he said all men are created equal? Now we are living that out because we are fighting a war to free men. Lincoln said at the end, the U.S. is ruled by a government of the people, by the people, and for the people, and it shall not perish from the earth. And if this government is going to stay around, we better win this Civil War thing. And we do. Lincoln believed that America was one nation, not a collection of sovereign states. Sovereign means you can control your own destiny, make your own decisions. Lincoln says, no, states can't make all their own decisions. We are a country. We unite together and make one American decision. Of course, the Southerners believed that, well, the states joined the Union back in the Constitution days, and now they could just leave. And Lincoln says that's not true. So the war goes on, and on and on and on, for a few more bloody years, but then it ends in 1865. Robert E. Lee surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, Virginia, in 1865, just west of Richmond, the capital of the Confederacy. And what great news! This war is finally over. Now, Lee, to his credit, at the end of the war, urged Southerners, he says, we must accept defeat. We've lost. It's over. We must unite as Americans, which is kind of interesting because a lot of Southerners in his army said, no, Lee, let's go into the woods and keep fighting. Many Southerners wanted to continue fighting even after the surrender at Appomattox, but Lee urged Southerners to unite as Americans and say this thing is over. What's the social impact of this war? How did it affect American society and Southern society? Well, for one thing, during the war, it was a brutal war. It was hand-to-hand combat. Diaries and letters were written constantly to record this harsh reality of war. Also, especially in the South, soldiers returned home to destroyed homes and great poverty because the Civil War was fought mostly in the South. Soldiers on both sides lived with permanent disabilities because on top of the over 600,000 troops that died, you had hundreds of thousands who lost an arm, who lost a leg, and for the rest of their life, they're living with this harsh reality. All right, we're on question number 17. You know, women played a huge role during America's crisis of Civil War. They managed homes and families with scarce resources because it's hard to develop resources when everybody's busy killing each other in war. And the men were gone fighting. The women had to manage home and farm and faced poverty and hunger while they did it. Women assumed new roles in agriculture, nursing, and war industries. So the place of the woman in American society increases dramatically, mostly out of the need that was created because of the strenuousness of the Civil War. All right, money. Let's talk moolah. Question number 18. Southerners left embittered and devastated after war because, hey, this makes sense. They lost, so their farms, railroads, and factories were destroyed. Still on question 18. In southern cities such as Richmond and Atlanta, two of the biggest cities in the South, the source of labor had changed due to loss of life and the end of slavery. Think about that. The South made so much of their money off of cotton, really, and that was because of slavery. But if slavery's gone, who can grow the cotton? Well, all the men, right? Well, no, like a lot of the men are gone because of the death of the Civil War. So this destroys the Southern economy. And the South will remain agricultural-based economy and the poorest section of the nation for many years after the Civil War. Let's switch gears and go to question number 19. The North and the Midwest, just the opposite, emerged with strong and growing industrial economies because they were the big winners and their economy grew to fight the war. This will lay the foundation for industrialization of the nation, except in the South. Remember, that's the poor, backwards agricultural area for the next 50 years. Still on 19, the U.S. will emerge as a global economic power by the beginning of the 20th century. And you can say that the Civil War for the North and the Midwest was a springboard to bring the U.S. to that point. All right. So we have ripped the country apart because of Civil War. Well, here's a tough job. How are we going to bring it back together? Well, good old Abe Lincoln, good guy Lincoln, he supports a lenient Reconstruction. Don't worry, be happy, South. You know, gosh, we killed hundreds of thousands of each other, didn't we? But with malice towards none, meaning no hatred towards our brothers in the South. With charity for all, we must bind up our nation's wounds. This is not Lincoln believes the opportunity to punish and beat down the South. Instead, let's be gentle to our fellow Americans. Well, great plan. Only problem is the assassination of Lincoln a few days after Appomattox changes all of that. If Lincoln is gone, then the Radical Republicans is what they were called. They were in Lincoln's party, but they were more radical than Lincoln was, and they want to use Reconstruction as a punitive manner, meaning to punish the South. They want to do two things: punish the South and give more rights to freed African Americans. Let's start with punishing the South, shall we? Radical Republicans would put the South under military occupation. Poor, humble soldiers like me, you know, Mr. Tory, first name his, I've got to go into the South, and I got to keep them under control with my musket. Military occupation. The South will hate this, okay? But also, Radical Republicans advocated for voting and other civil rights for African Americans. In 1857, Dred Scott wasn't even allowed to be a free man, and now Radical Republicans are pushing for African Americans to vote. Exciting stuff. Still on question number 22. Radical Republicans hated a guy named Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson was Abraham Lincoln's vice president, so like it didn't really matter until Lincoln got assassinated. Then he became the president. Andrew Jackson would get impeached but not removed from office. This is a key idea. Impeached is when the House of Representatives says, hey, you did something bad, we're going to put you on trial. The Senate actually decides whether to kick a president out. Andrew Johnson does not get kicked out, but he did get impeached, and it was the Radical Republicans attacking him because he didn't want to punish the South, and he didn't want to give rights to African Americans like they did. All right. Question number 23. Let's talk amendments, shall we? There's three big amendments called the Civil War Amendments. First one's the 13th Amendment. This will abolish slavery. Slavery, the awful, terrible stain on American history, is gone with the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment's got funny wording, but it's kind of a simple thing. States are prohibited from denying equal rights under the law to any American. Now, what this means is that these African Americans who aren't slaves anymore, they are now citizens. So if you have lots of rights, you have the rights of being a citizen of the U.S. So the 14th Amendment gives citizenship, and the 15th Amendment will give voting rights. It says voting rights are guaranteed regardless of race, color, or previous condition of servitude. That means if you were a slave before. Now, I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, well, golly, how am I ever going to remember all those amendments? Well, you're a teenager. Start with the teens. Start with 13, then go 14 and 15. And remember this: free citizens vote. Free citizens vote. If you're a citizen and you're free, you should vote. Those that vote are free citizens. Free citizens vote. You can put all those together. You can remember 13th freed the slaves, 14th granted full citizenship, and 15th granted the right to vote. All right, question 2-6. Reconstruction's got to end, right? The election of 1876 ends Reconstruction. Here's what happens. It was a close one, so close. And Southern Democrats supported Republicans. They supported new President Rutherford B. Hayes. And they said, okay, we're gonna vote for you. We're gonna let a Republican come in. But you've got to get rid of the military in the South. You've got to end military Reconstruction. And when that happens, that ends Reconstruction. It was called the Compromise of 1877, the Compromise of 1877. But think about it, if guys like me are out of the South, that allowed former Confederates to regain power, and they quickly imposed segregation. It opened the door for the Jim Crow era, the era of segregation. So 26 is loaded. Compromise of 1877, Confederates regain power, opens the door for the Jim Crow era. And all these famous guys, what happened to him in the end? Well, let's talk about Grant. You know, Grant was actually going to be president. He was president for most of Reconstruction. And when he was president, he opposed retribution against the South, meaning he didn't want to beat down his former enemy, the former Confederacy. But he advocated for the rights of freedmen, so he pushed for those amendments. He pushed and backed up these rights for African Americans. What about Robert E. Lee? A funny thing is that you think the guy that killed everybody would have done something soldiery. Well, actually, he's going to urge Southerners to reconcile and rejoin the Union because so many Southerners worship Robert E. Lee. And he's going to emphasize the importance of education. He's going to become a president of a college. Then it was called Washington College. Today it's called Washington and Lee University because they changed the name to honor their former president. He will die on his desk at Washington College in Lexington, Virginia. Last guy, Frederick Douglass. Frederick Douglass supported full equality for African Americans, and he encouraged the federal government to protect the rights of freedmen. He was always going to the president saying, you got to back me up. You got to back up African Americans on the 14th Amendment, citizenship, on the 15th Amendment, voting. And at the end of his life, he serves as the ambassador to Haiti and in the civil service, which is pretty cool for a guy who was born as a slave. He ends as a citizen of the United States, working as an ambassador to Haiti and in the civil service.